police department's report on its
missing women investigation has been made public. The document confirms women's lives could have been saved, but a series of mistakes and omissions by police investigators failed to interrupt Robert Pickton's murder spree.
Canada is well known for being friendlier, slower, peace, and safer, but there have been a few serial killers north of the border that are just as terrifying as the American counterparts. And Ricopt, and here is Canada's worst serial killer. Robert Pickton, who was affectionately called Willie, was born on October 24 in 1949 in the Canadian town of Port Coquitlam, in British Columbia, about 30 kilometers east of Vancouver. This 72-year-old monster came from a family whose last 3 generations had been dedicated to raising pigs. Robert Pickton, along with his brothers David and Linda, suffered abuse and violence from his parents, Leonard and Lois. There are not a lot of details about Pickton's life. Prior to him becoming a serial killer, are currently publicity laws regarding ongoing criminal investigations. What is known is that he was born in 1949 in Port Coquitlam, British Columbia. His family has been pig farmers for 3 generations, after his brothers sold part of the farm for $5.16 million. Pickton took over the pig farm and land, much to of the indifference of his brothers, who decided to get out of the family business. At the time of his arrest, Pickton has stopped using the farm for farming and was raising only a few pigs to sell to friends and neighbors. Also, for the next 2 decades, the farmer used his 1.5 acres as a pig farm, a scrapyard, and as an out-of-service vehicle graveyard, and a regular home. Also, Robert was considered as a quiet man locally. He and his brothers always threw wild parties frequented by locals. Vancouver prostitutes and Hells Angels members. Things are getting heated. I was saying, oh yeah, Hells Angels in a converted building near the pig farm called the Piggy Place. On one occasion, the farmer gathered nearly 2,000 people in this illegal party room. As I said before, things are getting heated. Really quiet and very polite. In short, a good-natured little bastard, one of his former neighbors once said. And despite the macabre jokes he used to play on his friends,
have some psychiatric problems.
he invited them to use his meat grinder if they ever need to dispose a body. The truth is that no one ever suspected the other side of him, the serial killer. In 1997, Robert was charged with attempted murder of a prostitute named Wendelin Eister, having tried to stop her, but the case was dismissed because prosecutors felt the victim, who was a drug addict, was too unstable to give accurate testimony. Despite that, both the victim and Pickton, who was stopped during the encounter, they were treated at the same hospital.
He asked me to go up to his place, and I asked him where it was. He said Coquitlam, and I said, no, it's a little too far. I said, well, I'll give you $100. He goes, I'll bring you back within an hour and a half. So I said, yeah, okay. He stabbed me 4 times, twice in the abdomen, once on my rib cage, punctured one of my lungs, and a cut on my left arm.
One curious fact is that Robert's brother, David Pickton, had a criminal record for sexual assault in 1988 and also had been sued several times for traffic violations. Another curiosity is that his brother will start a foundation in Ghana. Throughout his criminal career, which lasted from 1978 to 2002, Robert used the Downtown East Side district, the so-called red light district of Vancouver, where the prostitutes, pimps, addicts met. He liked to capture his victims in the neuralgic center of Vancouver. They were young women and polydrugs addicts between 19 and 46 years old, without family ties and with legal problems, whose only way out was have sex in exchange for a few dollars. The farmer took advantage of those weaknesses to attract them to his farm. Once there, the affable pig farmer began his particular slaughter. In 1978, Patricia Gay Perkins was the first one, the first victim, but she was not reported missing until 1996. 6 more women would disappear in between 1978 and 1995. The pace picked up in 1995 with 3 new disappearances, 3 more in 1996, 6 in 1998, and 8 more in 1997. The victims ranged range in age from 19 to 46 years old. One of the most favorite stories about one of his victims was the story of Mona, an indigenous woman from the Alberta Reservation who was lost in heroin in the streets of Vancouver's Red Light District. There, the young woman practiced the so-called survival sex. I mean, she was selling her body to support her drug addiction, also pay bills. Robert Pickton took advantage of her vulnerable situation to get her to his farm, where he supposedly had thrown a party with all kinds of drugs. But upon arrival, Mona met death. Another curiosity is that in 1999, Canadian police received an anonymous tip that Robert kept human fleshes in freezers on his property. Although a warrant was obtained, no search was carried out. The Canadian police doesn't know how many lives they would save if they had only gone to that house that day. The methodology used in each murder was very different depending on the chosen victim. Some he had strangled with a piece of wire, others he stabbed dozens of times throughout the body, and even killed several of them with a shot in the head. His modus operandi was preceded by a brutal sexual assault, in which he beat and harassed women with various sexual objects.
He got up from the corner of the bed. He said, "Andy," he said, "you know what I do with hookers?" And he grabbed 3 items like this. One being a leather belt and a piece of wire, angling of some kind, and a pair of handcuffs. He proceeded onto his knees onto the bed and pretended there was a woman in front of him, stroking their hair. He motioned with his left hand, grabbing an arm that wasn't really there, and with his other hand, he pretended to slip on handcuffs. Once he got the handcuffs on, he grabbed his belt and he motioned about putting this belt around their neck, stroking their hair, saying it was all going to be all right, it was going to be all over now. He got up from the bed, sat back down, and looked at me and said, "Do you know how much people bleed? You wouldn't believe how much people bleed." He says that after that, he says, "I take them to the barn, hang them, and gut them."
Another macabre story about this man is that he took a dildo, tied into the end of the .22 caliber revolver, raped a girl, and then killed her with it. Once dead, and in order to get rid of the victims quickly and easy, he proceeded to rape them, strangle them, bleed them, and disembowel them by passing them through a wood chipper. Finally, the murderer used the human mincemeat as food for this animal, the pigs. Of the 65 missing women, the police could only find proof and evidence about 6 of them. The resulting mincemeat mix with pork from their farms was delivered to his friends and families in packages. It was claimed in a Biography Channel documentary about the case that Pickton lured his victims to his farm using a simple ruse, such as pretending to pay with sexual favors.
Their addictions are so out of control. They're either high when they're making the decisions about whose car they're getting into, or they're so desperate to get high that they're going through acute withdrawal, which makes them physically really ill.
During the sex, he will become violent and accuse the victims of something such as stealing from him to increase his anger. He will then pin them down, tie them up, and kill them by strangling or shooting them, and then dismember their bodies. This will repeat until 1987, when 20 women sex workers from the downtown east side disappeared without a trace, without the authorities being able to open any investigation despite the efforts of family and friends to find them. The case mostly reports were ignored due to the absence of bodies, and mainly also due to the police prejudice towards women with a history of addictions and lack of roots. In my opinion, the police can be guilty by omission since they ignored the complaints and even the anonymous notice that Robert kept human flesh due to the fact of being an addict.
It certainly wasn't a textbook case on how to do an interview.
The proof of this was when a survivor of the so-called Vancouver Reaper managed to escape certain death asked for help. She tried to report her attack for attempted murder. However, after Robert's arrest and questioning, the police, the agents, accepts the farmer version. After this, the police released him, even though the woman's injuries were so evident. The woman's testimony was unconvincing to them because of her heroin dependency. I mean, if you're an addict or something like that, looks like your opinion is not valid, or even your testimony is not valid. Well, why? Well, because you're an addict, right?
I don't use drugs, and then everybody says, how come your eyes are so bloodshot? I says, I turn around, I didn't take the knife away from her. I did not take the knife away from her. I aimed it to her, and I knifed her twice. I did do that. I admit I did that. That's one thing I didn't.
And the charges against Robert were dismissed for lack of evidence. Finally, the police got to work, start working after the complaint and efforts of a group of indigenous people from Alberta who wanted to clarify the disappearance of several members from their community. The official investigation began in September 1998, but the following 4 years were unsuccessful due to the lack of evidence and little cooperation of the red light district pimps, who did not provide accurate information about the possible perpetrators. Meanwhile, the serial killer continued with his uncontrollable kidnapping and murder of women without their bodies being found. On February 5, 2002, a routine search warrant for the crime of illegal possession of weapons led to the home of Robert Pickton. That morning, the police arrived at the Reaper's farm with a request to inspect the property. They soon found illegal weapons, so they proceed to arrest Robert and seal the area. In the first search, investigators seized ammunition for a .357 Magnum night vision goggles, a handcuff, a syringe, along with a bottle that read a Spanish fly aphrodisiac, as well as an asthma inhaler with Serena Sabot's name on it. Hours later, Robert was released. Although under police surveillance, they have not yet checked the name that appeared on it, the asthma inhaler. But once the results was obtained, the Canadian Mounted Police returned to the farm and arrest Robert Pickton for the murder in first degree of Serena Abbott-Staway and Mona Wilson. With specialized archaeologists rebuilt a macabre discovery: 2 large freezers covered with heavy machinery, inside which were plastic bags containing 2 vertically severed female heads, as well as the remains of several feet, hands, and partial jaws. Their not complete bodies was published in the New York Times. In the motorhome, or the RV, they also found teeth, identifications, clothing, shoes, and personal belongings such as a Holy Post stand belonging to Lori Ellis and a bloody stained bag belonging to Serena Abbott-Staway. In addition, a .22 caliber, the caliber that I mentioned before, that contains Mona DNA traces. And next to it there were ammunitions, a knife, hypodermic needles, sex toys, and handcuffs. Until the day of the trial, which was held in January 2007, the authorities charged Robert Pickton with 26 counts of first-degree murder, although in the end they could only prove the murder of 6 people: Mona Wilson, Serena Abbott-Staway, Marnie Free, Brenda Wolfe, Andrea Johnsbury, and Georgina Papin. The trial against the Butcher, as the investigators nicknamed him, began in January 30 in 2007 in the new Westminster Supreme Court, practically 5 years after his capture. On the first day of the trial phase, Judge James Williams warned of the harshness of the process, not because of the duration, it lasted almost a year, but above all because of the harshness of the evidence collected and the cruelty of the testimonies, especially that of the accused. Some of the 300 journalists who covered the trial even need psychological help. In December 2007, after a week of deliberations, jurors found the defendant guilty of 6 counts of second-degree murder, not the first-degree murder as requested by the prosecutors. Under Canadian law, the prisoner was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole before 25 years. During the reading of the verdict, 2 opposite scenes were expected. The farmer lowered his head, as he had done throughout the process, and continued without showing any emotion or empathy. With the relative of the victims celebrated the decision, the room became an amalgamation of tears, cheers, and screams. For his part, the magistrate had several words for the condemned men whose conduct he described as a homicidal. Also, I cannot know the details of said crimes. I know this. What happened to those women was absurd and despicable. I'm talking about what the judge said. He even came to recriminate him. Mr. Pickton, there's really nothing that you can say to express the revulsion the community felt at these murders. After all, he took advantage of their extreme vulnerability. With troubled lives and substance abuse, who sold their bodies to strangers to survive, to perpetrate the worst of the barbarities. Now, pay attention to this, because this is gonna shock you guys. On August 4th of 2010, the other 20 charges were revoked. Since then, 3 appeals have been filed with the British Columbia Court of Appeal. The first of the defense was rejected, and that the accusation was admitted due to an error by the investigating judge in the exclusion of some evidence and in the division of some charge. Pickton's defense then filed an appeal with the Supreme Court of Canada, which was rejected on July 30, 2009. This monster is currently in jail. It's so sad the way these poor ladies die. No matter what they do for a living, they're still being humans, and some of them claim help, and it wasn't listening. Don't forget to subscribe.
That's what I was slapping people for. Yeah.